أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Assalamu alaikum, beloved community. Jummah Mubarak to all of you. May Allah bless you guys on this day and our families and all those we're connected to. We are continuing our series on the 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi. May Allah be pleased with him. And we're on Hadith number 3. And Hadith number 3 reads in the Arabic, عن أبي عبد الرحمن عبد الله بن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول بني الإسلام على 5 شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وحج البيت وصوم رمضان رواه البخاري ومسلم. So this hadith is talking about the fact that Islam is founded upon 5 things. It's built upon 5 things, and these structural and foundational elements of the faith are the shahada, are the establishing of the salah, the giving of zakah, the hajj to the house of God, and the pilgrimage to the house of God, and the fasting in the month of Ramadan, and it's related by both Bukhari and Muslim. And so this narration, we've been kind of unpacking last time to give you all a quick reminder of the way we've been speaking on this. We've been reflecting on some of the wisdoms of these fundamental pillars. And we talked about how the structure of our religion is really founded on praxis or practice. And these practices are infused with the spirit. So it's holistic practice, not just a mechanized or robotic form of going through a series of acts, right? That we consider sacred, but that they have a spirit to them, so they're alive. And we also were reflecting on this question of some of the wisdoms and themes that sort of tie these together. And so I want to add to that conversation that we don't just think of these as I just mentioned, mechanized rituals, but that these sacred rites are fundamentally technologies of transformation. There are tools for self-transformation and tools for communal transformation as well, when we do it with the right spirit and mindfulness, which is not an easy feat. So we also then last time kind of started to go through these one by one, and our discussion on shahada, right, that we bear witness. We spoke a little bit about how linguistically shahida is kind of this witnessing, and when you witness something that's tied to something you've seen, and when you've seen something, it's something that's appeared before you and is so obvious that you saw it. So there's a sense of obviousness that we're trying to cultivate in our hearts with regards to the fact that there is no God save Allah. And this cultivation is not just tied to a belief in the mind and heart, but also a kind of loyalty and commitment that is higher than all other loyalties and commitments in our heart and mind, when we say that we bear witness and give open testimony that there is no God but Allah. And that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his servant and messenger. We reflected on how we really need to connect and cultivate a love for the Prophet that is beyond all other loves, right? And that the completion of Iman really lies in us being attached to the Prophet in a way that comes before our other attachments in this life. And that again also is something that needs to be cultivated. It doesn't just bear fruit without effort, right? And so I had suggested that we pick up a book that will help us to connect with the Prophet, and I mentioned the famous Hadith collection of Ash-Shama'il at-Tirmidhi. Then we talked about Salah, right? And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word iqam as-salah, right? Or aqim as-salah. So the idea of, and in this hadith as well, right? Iqam as-salah. So it's not just praying the prayer, but it's actually establishing it. So there's something of really making it fixed in our lives, and individually as well as communally. But then what are we establishing? We're not just establishing a routine or a habit, but we are also establishing fundamentally the remembrance of God. That is what we're actually establishing. That's the reality of the prayer. It's a dhikr. And so you're remembering Allah. So what we're really establishing, both at an individual level and at a social level, is this idea of, or not even idea, it's this reality of remembering God. And we also talked in our discussion on Salah around honoring the time and how it's a sacred time, and these are fixed times that God has prescribed, and that they're meant to not only guide when we perform these rites, but also impact our understanding and our relationship to time itself. And Salah also has a place in that. And to take us away, this practice should be, inshallah, and hopefully working towards, when we do these practices, that we are trying to become closer to that reality of time, rather than this kind of time that's overburdened with efficiency and calculation and future centeredness, obsessed with like what's the next thing to do. And we're all guilty of this, right? I think it's just sort of what is prevalent right now in our modern living conditions, but I think we do have to actively work against it, and this is one of the means of doing so, our basic practices. So that is kind of where we left off last time, and now today we are entering our discussion on zakah. So ita is zakah, the giving of zakah. Now zakah is such a broad topic, and I'm gonna try my best to avoid kind of getting into the fiqh or the legal dimensions to the best of my ability, but maybe we'll touch on like pieces of it here and there that are relevant. But let's begin by just appreciating that zakah linguistically comes from a root word that signifies purification. And so purification of what we're purifying, our wealth, right? And this idea of purification is also a theme that we can use to string together these fundamental pillars we're talking about, right? The shahada, the salah, the zakah, the sawm, the fasting, and the hajj. All of these can be strung together with this notion of purification. So just stepping back from zakah for a moment, let's start with the shahada, right, as that first fundamental pillar. Belief, right, but also in a sense what we notice first, what is obvious to us, what is front of mind, right? What do we notice first? So what defines the way we look at the world? That's the level that I want us to focus on when we're talking about the shahada here. So when we're thinking of purification, it's the purification of what we notice first. It's the purification of our worldview. It's the purification of how we first engage what's before us, what is most obvious to us, what is front of mind. Salah can be thought of as kind of the body that holds that worldview and reminds us to live in that frame of mind. So it purifies, when we think of salah as a form of remembrance, it purifies what we remember. It purifies what we are preoccupied with, right? And it's a vehicle for that remembrance. It's a structure for that remembrance. And so we purify then through it our preoccupations. We also purify through it what preoccupies our time. So how we use our time is also being purified, right? Our internal orientation is being purified and shaped and formed by this constant tool and transformation, tool of personal transformation and collective transformation, or means. So we can see that same theme of purification carrying over to zakah, in we're purifying our wealth, but also certain dimensions of our heart that we'll discuss in a second. And then when you look at Som, we're purifying our body, right, of its urges. Almost we're paying the zakah of the body by fasting. We're purifying our body of inclining towards base desires to the detriment of higher objectives we have for ourselves individually and communally. And so we're purifying our ability to say no to ourselves, which is important. We're sharpening it. And then finally, when Hajj, we can think of as something that is combining all of this, because it has a dimension of purifying belief. It has a dimension of purifying our remembrance and what we're preoccupied with. It has a dimension of financial sacrifice, just as zakah has a dimension of financial sacrifice and purification. And it also has a physical, bodily dimension, right? Just like fasting does, because we are moving, we are traveling, we are engaged in a kind of physical exhaustion. So Hajj is sort of this, bringing it together and in a sense a culmination and a realization of all of this. So I thought that was another helpful way to tie all of these pillars together. Now coming back to zakah, we started with this point that we want to focus on how it purifies our wealth, but also what are other elements to this beautiful practice that we have and that we've been blessed with. I want to kind of build on some of the things that are mentioned by Imam al-Ghazali, may God be pleased with him, that I think are very beneficial for us to really ponder upon. And I will be sort of turning to this work that he's written, Inner Dimensions of Islamic Worship. So I'll be reading periodically and then reflecting with you during the course of this session today. But before I get to that, let me just take a second here to absorb what I've written down. So there are three main ways that Imam al-Ghazali talks about, speaks on this issue of the major purpose of zakah, right? And for those that are interested in maybe purchasing the book later, it's Al-Ghazali, Inner Dimensions of Islamic Worship. This is the chapter on almsgiving or zakah. And he talks about understanding the purpose and significance, right? And he says there are three major dimensions or categories under this. The first being the testing that zakah is meant to help zakah is a means of testing the degree to which we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the degree to which we love God. And I thought that was a very insightful way of putting it, because he pits that against our love for wealth, right? And if we're honest with ourselves as a species, we are, wealth is very important to us because it's tied to our well-being, it's tied to our ability to achieve our goals, it's tied to our self-esteem, it's tied to so many dimensions of our experience as human beings. And so there is a natural attachment to it. But because of its significance, there's also so much at stake there with regards to what could go wrong in that relationship that we have to our wealth and to our resources. And so I thought, this idea that, the one that we love, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is challenging us to demonstrate our love for Him by sacrificing one of the most beloved and wrought items, or wrought kind of something that's so charged, this idea of money and wealth and what it means to us, and that we have to chisel away at the attachment that we have to money, and it's meant to help us work on our relationship to money and wealth and resources that we possess. And we demonstrate our love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by putting our attachment to money, or getting in right relationship with money, really getting in right relationship with money, and demonstrating to him that we're not as attached to our wealth and resources as we are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he wants from us, which is ultimately to our benefit. I think there's a beautiful ayah as well that he cites here that, it's kind of helps us appreciate this point, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah At-Tawbah, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله اشترى من المؤمنين أنفسهم وأموالهم بأن لهم الجنة. The ayah he mentions is speaking on jihad, right? But there's a broader implication, of course, here as well. And this verse translates as, indeed, God has purchased, right? Purchased from the believers their very selves and their wealth in exchange for the fact that Jannah, the garden, is for them, right? Paradise being theirs for the price, is another way that it's translated. So I thought that was just very beautiful analogy and metaphor of God purchasing from the believers their very selves and their wealth, right? And then for that, Allah has assigned us paradise, right? For that price. That's the exchange. That's the beautiful exchange, right? That's not the transactional exchange, but it's a beautiful exchange. So